The woman next to me on the flight couldn't stop staring at my wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, worn smooth by 40 years of wear, a constant presence on my left hand since the morning Sandra died. 30 years. That's how long it had been. Just before the plane began its descent into Boston, she finally spoke, her voice a careful whisper. "Are you Sandra's husband?" I froze. My wife, Sandra, had passed away 3 decades ago. The words felt like a punch to the gut, bringing back a wave of grief I thought I'd long since buried. Then, she pulled out an old, faded photograph. It showed a newborn baby, swaddled in a blue blanket, lying in a hospital bassinet. "That baby," she whispered, her eyes fixed on mine. What she said next sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread that told me my search for the terrifying truth had only just begun. "I'm Arthur Calloway, and I've flown countless times in my 70 years. Denver to Boston, Boston back to Denver, trips for ranch business. I know how to keep my composure at 30,000 feet, but the woman in seat 14A, Marion Wells, had just handed me something I didn't know how to hold. Her voice was quiet, practiced, like someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. "My name is Marion Wells. I was the family attorney for your wife, for Sandra." Marion, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and the careful posture of decades in courtrooms, explained that she had been looking for me for almost as long as Sandra had been gone. The pilot's voice crackled overhead, announcing our descent. I barely heard it. My thumb instinctively rubbed the gold band on my finger, a habit whenever I felt unsettled. I understood now why she had noticed my ring. "Before Sandra passed," Marion continued, her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention, "she came to me with something she needed drawn up privately. Very privately." She paused, choosing her words with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. "She drafted a secondary will, Arthur. A document separate from the estate plan you and she had on file with your primary attorney. She left it in my care because she was afraid of what would happen if it came to light too soon." "A second will?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. Sandra had never mentioned anything of the sort. She wouldn't have. Marion's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because the beneficiary of that will was someone you didn't know existed." The cabin felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing inward. A flight attendant rolled a cart past our row. The world kept moving, indifferent to the fact that mine had just lurched sideways. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Marion reached into her leather bag and produced the photograph again, the one now trembling slightly between my fingers. "Sandra left the entirety of her land holdings and her share of the ranch to a child," she said. "A daughter. Yours." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt it in my throat. "I don't have a daughter." "You do," Marion's voice didn't waver. "You just never knew she was born." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again, like a man who had forgotten how language worked. And there it was, the name I hadn't spoken aloud in over 30 years, the name I had buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself the grief had composted into something unrecognizable. Eleanor, the woman who had walked out of my life one morning in the spring of 1991, without a single word of explanation. No letter, no phone call, no goodbye. Just gone, the way people in bad dreams disappear between one blink and the next. Sandra had told me Eleanor left because she didn't want to complicate things, that she had moved away, started over, chosen a different life. I had been devastated. I had also believed every word. My chest felt like something inside it was cracking along an old fault line. "Eleanor," I repeated, the word coming out rough, scraped raw at the edges. My vision blurred. I gripped the photograph tighter, the worn paper soft against my palm, and stared at the baby in the blue blanket. Something moved through me that I did not have a name for. Something between grief and fury and a longing so old it had grown roots. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where is this daughter?" Marion looked at me with an expression that held equal measures of compassion and gravity. She leaned forward slightly. "That," she said, her voice the quietest it had been, "is only the beginning of what I need to tell you. Because Eleanor didn't leave you, Arthur." She placed one hand over mine, and I felt the warmth of it even through the numbness spreading up my arms. "She was taken away. And so was your daughter. The plane began its final descent. Outside the oval window, the lights of Boston were coming up through the cloud cover like scattered embers. My hand had stopped shaking. Something colder and steadier had taken the place of the shock. The first breath of a fury that had nowhere to go yet, but it was coming. What do you mean she was taken away? The words came out of me harder than I intended. Not loud, but sharp. Marian did not flinch. She had the composure of a woman who had been sitting with difficult truths for a very long time. Sandra found out about Eleanor Graves in the winter of 1991. She began folding her hands in her lap, settling in for testimony. She hired a private investigator, standard practice for someone in her position, a wife who suspected her husband of infidelity. My mind reeled. Infidelity. Eleanor and I had been together for years before Sandra and I married. There was no infidelity. But then, a cold dread began to creep in. Sandra had always been intensely private and fiercely protective of her image. I remembered the subtle shifts in her behavior after Eleanor left, a new intensity in her gaze, a quiet determination that I had attributed to her grief over Eleanor's departure. Marian continued, explaining that Sandra's investigator found Eleanor living in a small town, pregnant. The investigator, a man named Thomas, reported back to Sandra, and then the plan began to unfold. Sandra, driven by a desperate desire to protect her marriage and her reputation, decided to act. She arranged for Eleanor to be taken to a private clinic, far from our home, under the guise of offering her support. But the support was a lie. Eleanor was isolated, her calls intercepted, her letters never sent. She was told that I had abandoned her, that I wanted nothing to do with the child. She was vulnerable, alone, and convinced that she had no other choice. When our daughter was born, Eleanor was pressured to sign adoption papers, told it was for the best, for the child's future. The adoption was facilitated by a broker, a man with connections who could make things disappear. "And you knew all of this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You, her attorney, knew she was doing this?" Marian looked away, her hands clasped tightly. "I was young, Arthur, and I was loyal to Sandra. She convinced me it was the only way to protect her family, to protect you from scandal. She painted Eleanor as a manipulative woman, a threat to everything you had built together." The plane touched down with a jolt, bringing us back to reality. The weight of Marian's words settled over me, heavy and suffocating. My wife, the woman I had loved and mourned for 30 years, had orchestrated a cruel deception, tearing a mother from her child and a father from his daughter. We met again a few days later, at a quiet diner in Boston. Marian brought with her a thick envelope, filled with documents. Among them was a birth record, dated September 14, 1992. Under Mother, it read, Eleanor Graves, age 22. Under Father, it read, Arthur Calloway, age 37. And under Child, it read, Female infant, healthy. Weight 6 pounds 4 ounces. My eyes stopped there. Crescent-shaped birthmark. Inner left wrist. I had to press my hand flat against the table to keep myself upright. 30 years. 30 years I had lived. Farmed the same land. Slept in the same house. Eaten at the same table where Sandra had once sat. Watching me with eyes I now understood differently. 30 years of a life built on a foundation of buried truth. Inside another envelope was a single document, Sandra's handwritten letter to her personal attorney, dated October 2, 1995, just 6 weeks before her death. I have made arrangements for a secondary will, Sandra had written. Arthur must not know about the child until after I am gone. I cannot face him, but she deserves what is hers. The land, the shares, the name. Please ensure the document reaches the right hands, if anything happens to me. The letter was never sent. The envelope had never been sealed. Sandra had written it, and then, for whatever reason, fear, hesitation, a last desperate hope that she would find another way, she had put it in the box and never given it to anyone. She had died 6 weeks later. The third envelope held photographs. Evelyn's own photographs, taken quietly in the clinic recovery room in September 1992. A young woman with dark hair and exhausted eyes, holding a newborn wrapped in a pale blue blanket. A woman who looked enough like me around the jaw and the brow that I felt something split open behind my sternum. Eleanor. I had not seen her face in 33 years. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, not speaking. Evelyn, Marion's assistant, who had helped gather these documents, did not push me. Through the small kitchen window, I could see the sky beginning to shift from black to a deep bruised blue at the horizon. Dawn was coming. The phone Evelyn had lent me buzzed against the table. An unfamiliar number. A 617 area code. Boston. I looked at Evelyn. She looked at the phone. "I think," she said slowly, "you should answer that." I picked it up. "You'll say that again," I said. Marion's voice on the other end of the line was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "The broker told me the mother had voluntarily relinquished the child," she said. "He showed me paperwork. It looked legitimate. I was so desperate, Arthur. You have to understand. My husband and I had wanted a child for so long. And here was this tiny girl being placed in my arms, and she was perfect. And I took her home, and I loved her with everything I had." Her voice finally cracked on that last sentence. Just slightly. Just enough to let me hear what was underneath it. "I did not find out the truth until 1998. I hired my own investigator because I wanted to know more about Claire's medical history. He found the Riverside Clinic files. He found Eleanor's name. He found yours." "And you said nothing?" I asked. I was terrified. The admission came out raw and immediate. Claire was 6 years old. She called me Mom. She had only ever known one home, one family. I told myself that going to you would destroy her stability, confuse her, take something from her that she had built her whole sense of self around. I told myself I was protecting her. Another pause. Longer this time. I know how that sounds. I know it was not my decision to make. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the sky had shifted to a pale, cold gray, the first thin light of dawn spreading low along the horizon. The world outside looked very quiet, very ordinary, as though it did not know that everything inside that kitchen had changed. "What changed?" I asked. "Why now? Why this plane? This week?" Marion was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had steadied. "The primary attorney Sandra used back then passed away earlier this year. His estate sent his old legal archives to the county probate office. It should have been sealed, but due to an administrative oversight, it was not. That is how Thomas, Sandra's original investigator, discovered the existence of the secondary will. He immediately began making quiet inquiries, trying to ensure the named beneficiary, your daughter, would never be located. Thomas, the man who had helped Sandra orchestrate this whole deception, was now trying to finish the job. He had found Claire, my daughter, and was attempting to prevent her from ever learning the truth, from ever claiming what was rightfully hers. But Marion, now knowing the full extent of the deception, had intervened. She had contacted Claire, explained everything, and together, they had decided it was time to bring the truth to light. The phone call ended. I stood by the window, watching the dawn break, the weight of 30 years of lies pressing down on me. But amidst the anger and the grief, a new feeling began to stir. A flicker of hope. My daughter. She was out there, and she knew. A few days later, I found myself on the back porch of my own farmhouse, the same farmhouse where Sandra and I had lived, where I had mourned her, where I had unknowingly lived a lie for 3 decades. The air was cold, a crisp November morning, and sitting beside me, sipping coffee, was Claire, my daughter. She had arrived the previous evening, a quiet, observant woman with eyes that were undeniably mine. We hadn't spoken much, just sat in comfortable silence, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. She had found the coffee, made it herself, a small gesture that spoke volumes. "You made coffee," I said, my voice a little rough. "I found it," she said. "I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right," I replied, and sat down beside her on the step. We did not speak for a while. The sky above the ridgeline had begun its first slow shift, from black to a deep bruised blue, the stars fading one by one in the east, while the west still held them. The oak tree at the edge of the south field was a dark shape against the slightly lighter dark of the horizon. Somewhere out by the barn, I could hear Pete, my ranch hand, moving, the low sound of a gate, the quiet of animals starting their day, the world coming back to itself. I looked down at my left hand, at the ring I had worn for 40 years. The gold of it had gone soft and slightly uneven with time, worn thin at the edges, the way things get when they are carried long enough. I had not taken it off since the morning of Sandra's funeral. I had not thought about taking it off. It had become part of the landscape of my own hand, as unremarkable and constant as the lines on my palm. I thought about the woman on the plain, the way she had stared at it over Kansas, the way that single, unguarded look had set everything in motion. 30 years of buried truth rising to the surface, because a woman with patient eyes had noticed a gold ring on an old man's hand and decided finally that the time for silence was over. I turned the ring slowly on my finger. "You don't have to," Claire said quietly. I looked at her. She was watching me with those eyes that were my eyes, steady and without pressure. "Whatever you decide," she said, "it is yours to decide." I thought about Sandra, not the Sandra of the documents and the secrets and the terrible choices made out of fear and love, twisted together until they became indistinguishable. I thought about the Sandra who had planted the oak tree in bad soil, in a hard climate, because she believed it would grow. Who had written a letter she could not send and kept it in a box because she could not bring herself to destroy it either. Who had loved imperfectly and feared genuinely and tried in the end, imperfectly, to make it right. I slid the ring off my finger. It was lighter than I expected. Or perhaps my hand had simply forgotten what it felt like without it. I held it in my palm for a moment. Then I closed my fingers around it and held it the way you hold something you are not yet ready to put down, but understand finally that you were not meant to carry forever. "I didn't know what I was waiting for," I said. "For 30 years after she died, I thought I was just waiting for time to pass. Turns out, I was waiting for this." Claire did not say anything. She leaned her shoulder against mine, very slightly, the way a person does when words are not the right instrument, and we sat together on the back porch step of the Callaway farm in the cold November dark and watched the sun come up over the ridge. Looking back at this painful family story, the weight of what I carried for 30 years still catches my breath. I spent decades trusting blindly, never questioning the walls built around me, only to face a devastating family betrayal. If there is one piece of advice I can offer from my own blindness, it is this: do not be like me. Don't let comfortable silence cost you the truth, and never let your incuriosity swallow your life until it is almost too late. My belief is simple. I think true justice takes time, but it always arrives. God gave me the strength to stand firm against my own flesh and blood, proving that truth cannot remain buried forever. This family story taught me that blood does not automatically guarantee loyalty. Dealing with a calculated family betrayal from your own children changes how you view the world. Yet, walking through this darkness allowed me to finally find my daughter, transforming a tragic family story into a journey of ultimate reclamation. We survived the family betrayal, and we are ready for a new dawn. What would you do if you discovered your whole life was built on a massive lie? If this journey moved you, please drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply impactful narratives. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. A quick warning: the upcoming narratives feature adapted elements crafted primarily for educational purposes. If you prefer not to listen, please feel free to exit and select alternative content better suited to your taste.